Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reader's Intrigue, where authors are going to read the first chapter of their book so that we can be intrigued and maybe find a new book to read. Get comfy, get cozy. Let's listen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Eoannou, and I am a short story writer and novelist based in Buffalo, New York. I'd like to thank Reader's Intrigue for giving me the opportunity to come in today and tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit my work, and especially about Yesteryear, my novel is coming out in October. A little bit about myself. In 1986, I was 23 years old, and I was going to grad school at Miami of Ohio. And about this time, that's when guys like Jay McInerney, Michael Chabon, Bret Easton Ellis, all these American male writers were coming out with their first novels, and they were all around 30 years old or younger. And as a 23-year-old kid sitting in class, I thought, that's going to be me. I'm going to have my first novel by the time I'm 30. That was my goal. Well, things didn't quite go the way I had planned, and my 30th birthday passed, and my 40th birthday passed, and it wasn't until I turned 52 that my first book came out, which was a short story collection called Muscle Cars. That was published by SFWP. And Muscle Cars is 17 short stories about guys making bad decisions, semi-autobiographical. So that came out in 2015. That won the SFW Literary Awards Prize. And after 30 years of trying, I finally broke through and had my first book published. My first novel, a novel called Rook, came out last year in 2022. And Rook is based on the story of the real life man named Al Nussbaum, who was from Buffalo, New York, like myself. And he robbed about a half a dozen banks before his wife or the FBI figured out what he was up to. So you can imagine that dinner conversation. Today, though, I want to talk to you mostly about my new book, my second novel, Yesteryear, also published by SFWP. That comes out on October 3rd. And that's also based on the true life story of a Buffalonian, a man named Fran Striker. And you may not know Fran's name, but you know his work. Fran was the writer and creator of The Lone Ranger, The Green Hornet, Sergeant Preston, The Yukon. He was a huge influence on early radio and especially 20th century American pop culture. Not a lot of people know about Fran because he was involved either in the best deal in entertainment history or the worst deal in entertainment history because he sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $10 before it became huge. And so he missed out on not only the money aspect of it, but also he never really got the credit he deserved because the man he sold it to, George W. Trendle, started claiming in 1940s that he was the creator of the Lone Ranger. So my book explores how Fran came up with the idea for the Ranger series. It's a lot different than Rook and Muscle Cars in that it's those two early books were really very terse in their writing, very short sentences. Yesteryear is really kind of over the top. It's part noir, it's part comic novel, it's a historic novel, it's biographical novel. And my mantra was swing for the fences, which meant no joke was off limit, no sentence could be too long. Nothing was off the charts. I gave myself complete creative freedom to come up with a fantasy story, an adventure story about how a writer came up with an idea for what became a huge radio phenomena. So I'd like to read today the intro and first part of Yesteryear for you. Just a little bit about it. You know, again, Fran Striker was a script writer. So part of the book is structured like a radio script. So there's not an introduction. It just says music up, which was the stage direction on a radio script so the orchestra could start playing, and then the announcer speaks. And so this is the announcer speaking. Yesteryear, music up, announcer. Striker is dead. Barrett read the article on page 53 of the Buffalo Evening News, not on the front page where it belonged. The newspaper shook in his hands, the headline blurred by tears. He'd been killed in a late afternoon car crash, a head-on collision that sent the other driver and his granddaughter to the hospital. Barrett was certain that it was Striker's fault. He could picture the crash as if he were reading one of his radio scripts. Striker behind the wheel, a Lucky dangling between his lips, the window cracked to let smoke coil into the autumn air. As his mind drifted from the highway to storylines, from storylines to characters, and finally from characters to scenes, the things that always cluttered Striker's mind, his car had drifted across the double yellow lines and into the path of the oncoming station wagon. He didn't die on impact. He had time to be surprised by this final plot twist. Barrett was sure that as Striker sat pinned behind the steering wheel, his vision tunneling, he must have been thinking of the many ways he could describe the details surrounding the accident. The blood streaming from his scalp, laboring lungs about to quit, the cold spreading to his limbs. So his readers or listening audience would feel as if they were beside him, watching and hearing him die. The article listed all that Striker had accomplished in chronological order, but Barrett had known him before all that, before the radio and TV shows, before the books and comics, before his characters had become cultural phenomena. Barrett knew him when they were both young and Buffalo, New York was brimming with gangsters and bootleggers, dames and dolls, and there were not many heroes to be found, except for the two of them. They were best friends back when bathtub gin blinded, when magic shimmered on Buffalo sidewalks like lost silver waiting to be found, back when Barrett was the original Lone Ranger. Striker is dead, that much was certain, and Barrett hadn't spoke to him in 30 years. Let us return now to those thrilling days. Episode 1, Slattery's Rings. The magic didn't always occur at the typewriter. Sometimes it appeared after midnight, swirling over Buffalo's cobblestone streets like Christmas snow, accumulating on shoulders and hat brims, the pregnant flakes never melting. Tonight was such a night. When the clock struck 12, the bell in St. John's steeple rang across Colonial Circle, echoed off General Bidwell's bronze statue, and reached Fran Striker's house at 26 Granger Place. He looked up from his Remington 16 typewriter, his slender fingers poised above the keyboard, cocked his head. The clapper striking the hour returned him from his world of heroes and villains to his attic writing studio, where his desk was tucked under a sloping eave. He checked his watch, certain a mistake had occurred. The time had accelerated, that he had somehow been transported into the future. It couldn't be midnight already. This was his witching hour. The moment his neighbors and extended family insisted that he stopped his relentless typing, complaining that the hammer's continuous striking, the single bell announcing each margin end, the sliding carriage being returned and returned and returned, were keeping them awake, preventing them from rising early to search for jobs that didn't exist. He leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms towards heaven. A forgotten Lucky Strike smoldered in a littered ashtray. He reached for it, his fingertips nicotine golden, and took a final drag before stubbing it out. The house settled around him. The joists and load-bearing walls sighed and creaked as if relieved that the typing had finally ceased. On the floor below, his grandparents extinguished their nightstand lamps, thankful the clattering in the attic had ended. Across the hall from them, his brother-in-law Jerry lay smoking in bed, an ashtray balanced on his chest, praying for work. In the smallest bedroom, the boys, Bobby and Donnie, ages 4 and 2, slept curled in the same bed, unaware of their father's radio scripts or the late hour. In Striker's bed, his wife Janet waited for him. He rose from his desk and rolled his neck-popping vertebrae. Moonbeams streamed through the attic window and gleamed off his silver-plated saxophone propped in the corner. His eyes, reddened by too many cigarettes and too little sleep, took in his office. His desk stacked with scripts, paper scraps scrawled with story ideas, and his Kodak brownie holding the pile of overdue bills in place. The wooden file cabinets were crammed with radio scripts he'd written. The drawers would not close. A chemistry lab was set up in the corner, but the beakers and test tubes were dusty, both untouched since he dropped out of the University of Buffalo. His neglected sacks had once carried him to a different world where growing bills and dwindling cash did not exist, but he no longer had time to play. He felt the urge to pick up the horn and try to blow like Joey Hodges or King Carter. If he closed his eyes, he could feel the reed between his lips, his fingers on the keys, hear the notes bouncing through the attic walls to be heard by those who wandered the streets in threadbare coats. The silver sacks would have to wait. He remembered the last time he succumbed to the urge to play at midnight when his writing day had ended. How the boys awoke screaming, startled from their dreams. How Jerry had grabbed a broom and pounded on the ceiling, yelling for him to knock it off. And how Janet had raced up the attic steps in her nightgown, wanting to know what was wrong with him. And didn't he know people were trying to sleep? Stryker switched off the gooseneck lamp and plodded downstairs, his legs heavy and stiff from sitting. Each riser creaked under him as if complaining. Before heading to his room, he checked the children. He stood by their bed watching them sleep. What do little boys dream of? The last story he read to them, playing in the snow earlier in the day, juice. He pulled the quilt to their chins, smoothed their hair into place, then shut the door behind them. Janet was awake, propped on pillows, reading. Her hair, the color of chestnuts, was cut to the bottom of her ears and parted on the side. She lowered the book when he entered. How'd it go? He patted his shirt for cigarettes. Good. I worked on a couple Dr. Dragonette scripts and finished adapting Tom Sawyer. Have you seen my smokes? On the counter. On the dresser. She slid a bookmark between the pages and set the novel on her lap. You finished, Tom? I'll have to edit him tomorrow. Stryker crossed the room, moving like a much older man. He shook the lucky from the pack. Old Sam Clemens had Olivia as his editor, and I have you. That's right, and don't you forget it. Now come to bed. You look exhausted. I'll toss and turn and keep you awake like last night. I can't stop thinking about Dragonette. Is the evil doctor up to no good again? He's not evil enough, I'm afraid. I need to come up with something better, dastardlier, more dastardly. He lit the wooden match with his thumbnail and then lit a cigarette. You will. You always do. Come to bed. Stryker held the smoke in the back of his throat. His mouth formed an O as he puffed one ring after another toward the ceiling. They swirled higher, breaking into a bluish haze. The winter wind rattled the window panes as if vying for his attention. I think I might take a walk, he said, squinting through the fog window at what might await for him in the night. Get some fresh air and try to unwind. Maybe work out the Dragonette problem. Janet pressed her lips into a thin line before speaking. It's late, Fran, and cold. You'll freeze. Listen to that wind. He tilted his ear towards the window. The wind whispered through bare branches. He wondered what stories those voices were telling, if his hearing would be able to be keen enough to translate. I won't be long, he said, when the whispers faded. A few blocks up and back, and I'll be home. With a stopover at a speakeasy, just for a drink or two. We need to watch our money, Fran. The mortgage is due on the 15th. We need every dime. I need to walk to think. Janet opened her novel to the bookmark page without looking at him, not wanting to argue again. Go then. The sooner you leave, the sooner you'll be back. But even you need sleep, Fran. He stopped to kiss her before he left. She turned, offering her cheek. The wind had faded as quickly as it started. The moon ducked in and out of clouds, bringing and taking light as Stryker walked down Elmwood Avenue. The fresh fallen snow robbed the world of sound, muffling his footsteps and the narrow tires of passing cars, as if both he and the Model A's were floating inches above the earth. He passed Bidwell Flowers, Kaplan's Delicatessen, Flickinger's Grocery, and other shop windows covered by yellow newspaper or soap swirls. Some windows were left uncovered, revealing empty stores, casualties of the crash. Shadows shifted in those doorways. Cigarette tips glowed in the gloom. He inched closer to the curb, away from the men on the bum who waited for the train whistle, the signal that it was slowing, and for them to dash to boxcars heading west towards hope, towards jobs, towards California. He told Janet that it was Dr. Dragonette keeping him up at night, but it was the fear of failing everyone that made him toss and turn until it was time to get up and write again. He heard the lonesome train whistle and for a flashing moment envied the men who ran from the entranceways in patched overcoats and sprinted for the tracks, leaving their responsibilities behind. Along a near building's roofline, neon spelled bowling a letter at a time. He headed towards it and heard commotion from the tracks, the bull's shrill whistle, men shouting, cries of pain. He imagined the scene, railroad guards swinging billy clubs like Gehrig swinging for the fences, hungry men slipping on ice trying to get away, blood dappling the snow like fallen berries. A silver Arrow was parked in front of Volker's all-night bowling emporium. Striker stopped to admire the car, the blood-red pinstriping that matched the rims, to peer through the driver's side window at the oaken dash. Snow had accumulated on the fenders and hood ornament, covering the archer's drawn bow. He fought the urge to brush off the car to see the uninterrupted lines. He wanted to touch the steel with an ungloved hand. Stryker had sold his car, a Nash Roadster he and Janet had called Black Beauty after his favorite childhood story. He sold it to his friend John Barrett to help with the mortgage. As he circled the silver car, admiring from every side, electricity hummed through the green neon above him like buzzing hornets. Stryker left the car, weighed down by all the things he could never afford, a feeling as heavy as a lingering dream. He made his way down the side of the brick building to a gray door. A smaller neon sign hung above the side entrance, showing an orange ball moving towards white pins until it struck them. Janet had been right. He couldn't afford the luxury of a speakeasy. A car crept forward, snow crunching under tires, the entire building suddenly illuminating in blazing light. Stryker raised an arm to shield his eyes. "Keep your hands where I can see them," a voice commanded over the megaphone. Approach the squad car slowly. So that wasn't the full chapter, the full first chapter, but that was the intro in the very opening of chapter 1 of Yesteryear. And Yesteryear, as I said, is going to be published on October 3rd of this year, but you can pre-order it now. You can go to my publisher's website, sfwp.com, and order it there. You can go to Amazon or barnesandnoble.com and pre-order it there, or go to your favorite indie bookstore and they'll be able to pre-order it for you, and you'll get it a couple weeks before the pub date. Again, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to listen to this. I'd like to thank again Readers Intrigue for having me on today, and stay safe, everybody. And if you get a chance, go ahead and pre-order Yesteryear and help me out. Thanks again, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you again to the amazing author that read us a story, and be sure to check out all the other amazing shows on RB Media. Till next time, bye!